Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals between the New York Islanders and the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Lightning came into the day up 2-0 in this series, the Islanders hoping to cut that lead in half, and that's exactly what they would manage to do with this 5-3 win. It starts off with a Cal Clutterbuck goal to put the Islanders up 1-0. The Lightning would tie it up with Mikhail Sergachev, but after that, the Islanders would slowly build up a lead for themselves, a 2-goal lead coming from Pelech and Beauvillier, and normally in these playoffs, you'd expect the Islanders with a 2-goal lead to be able to close out the game, but the Lightning, credit to them, managed to fight back quite well, got a goal from Palat and then from Johnson to tie the game at 3, and it looked like it might go to overtime, where of course the Lightning are specialists, but Brock Nelson, as he's done so many times for the Islanders in these playoffs thus far, comes up clutch, gets the go-ahead goal in the last few minutes of the third period, and eventually Pajot would add an empty netter on top of that to get this victory and get the Islanders on the board in this series. Good news for the New York Islanders, a good response game. They obviously had that bit of a collapse there in the last few seconds of the previous game. It ended up costing them that one. It could have gone to overtime, but instead they lost 2-1 in regulation. And that is, a big blow to most teams, but the Islanders do have a very solid mental game, and so they managed to come back. They get the first goal of this game. Yes, they give up a 2-goal lead, but eventually they come out on top, and that is exactly what matters. And so they're finally on the board here in this series. It should also be mentioned that Varlamov, a pretty solid game for himself, not world beater just yet, but still very good. And obviously a lot of the other times in these playoffs where Varlamov was giving up 2-3 goals, that was on maybe like 20 shots from the other team, but the Lightning are really pressuring the Islanders. They're really pushing the Islanders, and so they had almost 40 shots in this game, so Varlamov letting in just 3 of those, and these were tough ones to save. That's definitely a great sign for the Islanders. He's definitely getting back into form. Bad news for the Islanders, I have to point out their special teams. Now, the Islanders are a team that takes very, very few penalties. I remember there was a stat shown in the Flyers series when they were against each other, where the Islanders, I think it was up to Game 6 or maybe even Game 7, had only taken 9 penalties, or had only given 9 power plays to the Flyers, which is just a crazy stat, right? That's like not even 2 penalties per game for the Islanders. So this is a very, very disciplined team, and so it worked out quite well against the Flyers. They managed to kill off basically every single penalty that they ended up taking, but here against the Lightning, it hasn't been so much. Today's game, they only took a single minor penalty, so they only gave a single power play to the Lightning, and the Lightning converted on that power play. That was the Palat goal, which is not a great look, and the Islanders, while they technically only got 2 power play opportunities in this one, couldn't really score for themselves, and of course, it only takes to look back at Game 2, where they couldn't score in a 5-minute power play plus a 5-on-3 to see that the Islanders special teams right now in this series are struggling, and as we've gotten later in these playoffs, you'll notice that the refs are definitely calling a lot less penalties. Yes, there were a ton of penalty minutes in this game, mostly because of the tons of rough stuff and the bunch of misconducts that were given out after this empty netter was scored by Pajot, but when you look at it, there were only 5 minors assessed in this game, and 2 of them were sort of coincidental minors on a roughing call, so only 3 power plays awarded, 2 for the Islanders, 1 for the Lightning, and so winning the special teams battle is incredibly important as we move later on. The Lightning won it tonight, and while it didn't win them the game, it is something that the Islanders do need to watch out for. On the Lightning side, the good news for them is that even with Braden Point out, obviously Steven Stamkos has been out the whole time, but Braden Point missed today's game. Even with that being the case, the Lightning are still really pushing. This is an incredibly deep team, and it seems to be a team that really wants to win. They're getting some great contributions from throughout their lineup. As I said, very, very deep team. And so it's very good to see that even in this situation where they lose probably their best forward, or at least who has been their best forward throughout these playoffs, even in a situation like that, the Lightning are still that good, and they're still competitive in this series. Yes, they lose, but it is a good sign for if Braden Point indeed is out longer term and isn't just back, let's say, for the next game. If he is back for the next game, the Lightning seem pretty set for this series. If not, there is definitely still a very good chance to make something happen here. On the bad news side of things, Vasilevsky has maintained a very consistent performance throughout the majority of these playoffs. I thought he was quite good in the series against the Boston Bruins. He had a couple of moments of shakiness, I would guess, against the Columbus Blue Jackets in the first round, and he's been quite solid throughout here against the Islanders in the first couple of games. Here tonight was probably his first sort of style of game. This was a bit of a weak one on the Pelech goal, which was the Islanders' second one, and on the fourth one, which was also the backbreaker for the Lightning. I felt as though Vasilevsky could have played this better. This was technically a cross-ice pass, but it was a pretty slow one, and I felt as though Vasilevsky was caught puck watching just a bit too much, not really expecting it for whatever reason to actually go across the ice, and so you see that he actually ends up being very delayed in his slide across, crashes into the post trying to overcompensate, and Nelson is able to put it past him. I feel like if Vasilevsky was maybe a bit more in the zone, that's a decently easy save. Not an easy save, but I guess not the most difficult save in the world to actually be able to make in these last few minutes. And maybe then, as I said, the Lightning forced the overtime, and we know they're overtime specialists. Maybe they get the victory. But Vasilevsky, a bit of a shaky game. I'm certainly not worried because he's been very good, probably the most consistent goaltender in these playoffs thus far, at least of the goaltenders who are remaining. And so it should be a bounce back game next one, but it is something to make note of. But that will do it for this recap. In terms of my prediction, I had said the Lightning would take this series in 6 games, with the Islanders getting one here. It seems as though that is still a very likely scenario, especially depending on when Braden Point actually returns from his injury. This is something that is still looking quite good. Class dismissed.